I mean, we're talking about all the reasons that there could be a silver lining or the market's bottomed out. I don't think you can know for sure that the markets are going to bottom out unless you know that there's going to be a successful resolution of this Ukraine war, at least a non-escalation of it. You've had Zelensky saying that they want to be admitted to NATO. You've got Putin basically annexing or saying he's going to annex the Donbass. And somebody, we don't know who, but according to Radek Sikorski, who's the Polish foreign minister, he thanked the U.S., somebody blew up the Nord pipeline. What is the common denominator of all these things? They're all eliminating key elements of what a peace deal would look like. So everyone understands that a peace deal would require Zelensky to give up on NATO. It would require Putin to make some compromises, likely in the Donbass. And it would require the sanctions to be lifted and the energy flows to be turned back on. Well, so now those things basically have been removed from the table. So I don't see how you're going to get a peace deal now. And so if you remove all the off-ramps, what's left? Escalation.
I thought you wrote a good piece in the American Conservative, Should America Go All In on Ukraine? If you haven't read it, it is 80% of rehash of what we've talked about here for the last year. But there's 20% new in it, I think. And I thought what was interesting in terms of new stuff you put in the piece, and it's a good summary of, poker strategy versus what's going on here, is that we've already proven, if you did want to prove that Russia is not a threat, with the exception of their nuclear, we now have proven that they're really not going to be able to do a domino and go into all these different countries, with the exception of, obviously, the threat of nuclear power.
What I was really responding to in that piece is the assertion by the media that Putin is bluffing. How do they know that? How do they know that? I think all of us understand poker pretty well, and none of us ever would have the confidence to assert that we know exactly what cards our opponent holds in any given hand and how exactly they'll play them. What do we do? What do smart players do? We put our opponent on a range of possible hands, of possibilities, and then we evaluate what did their previous actions tell us? What story are they telling through their previous actions? Well, what story has Putin been telling? This is not a guy who bluffs, in my opinion, or at least that is not the story.
So you think there's a chance he would pop off a tactical nuke? It's a non-zero chance, obviously.
I think if his life is on the line, he is incentivized to use every weapon at his disposal to try and prevent his violent overthrow.
His life isn't on the line here. He could back out.
Not yet, but where's this thing headed if there's no compromise? First of all, he's just called for the mobilization of 300,000 more troops. So that's going for step one.
People aren't leaving the country.
Yeah, exactly. Look, there's going to be very high costs on the Russian side. Yeah, there are going to be very high costs on the Russian side. I would not assume that means that there's something in it for us. The United States of America is blessed with being the most safe and secure country in the world and really in human history. And the history is full of humans constantly being at war with each other. So that is a really valuable thing that we have. Why are we so secure? We're surrounded by gigantic oceans. Yeah. We have these gigantic moats. In addition, thanks to the wisdom of the Monroe Doctrine, for 200 years, we have prevented any great powers from getting a foothold in the Western Hemisphere. We are completely dominant here, and no one could ever stage an invasion of the United States. We only have one vulnerability, just one, ICBMs. That's really it. So what are we doing? We are basically engaging in a proxy war with the person in the world who has the most ICBMs, and we are basically putting ourselves on an escalatory path with him. This would be like if Achilles had gone in front of the walls of Troy and basically taken off his armor and stuck his foot in the air and drawn a little bullseye around his heel. The better question to ask is, what's in it for us? What's in it for the United States of America? What is the vital interest that compels us to risk our security? There isn't one. This Donbass region is the Franz Ferdinand of this situation. It is not historically important to us. We have invested in it all of this importance, and we are potentially turning a regional war into a world war. We are sleepwalking towards this. Unless somebody finds an off-ramp, we are escalating our way into a much larger conflict. That is my point. And I don't see anyone should re-enter the markets with this geopolitical risk hanging over our heads. We're not in the end game. We're on a path towards escalation because all the off-ramps have been removed. That's my point. And instead of trying to find a diplomatic solution, first of all, we keep removing off-ramps, and then we blithely disregard the threat to ourselves by saying he must be bluffing. This is incredibly stupid. Well, one thing I should clarify, I like Freeberg's analysis of the fat tail risk, because I'm not saying it's likely that this conflict goes nuclear, but I don't need there to be a high likelihood in order for me to be very concerned about it because of how disastrous an outcome that would be. So if you're doing an expected value analysis, it's really hard to analyze the expected value or negative value of a low probability disastrous event, right? That's the classic fat tail risk. I do think that if the markets think they have priced in the effect of this war, then I think that's an argument for a lot of downside to this market, because it seems to me that we're on a one-way ratchet here. All the off-ramps for a peace or a diplomatic solution have been systematically taken away, and all that's left are potential escalations. I'll give you a couple of scenarios. I mean, well, here's one. I think we're just assuming that China's going to stay out of it. Imagine if you're China and you're watching what's happening and you're worried that actually Russia could lose this war so badly that it emboldens hawks in America who want to target China next, who are basically on this global struggle against autocracy. You're going to look at that and go, wait a second, is it really in our interest for Putin and Russia to be completely toppled by this global struggle against autocracy? It seems to me they could enter the Russian side, not militarily, but in terms of support. So they would have an incentive, again, not to lose an ally. And then by the same token, I think the Russians could lash out. I don't think they're going to go nuclear right away, but I think they could pull a Grozny when, in the Chechen war, when Russia was losing, they just rubbled Grozny. I mean, they basically leveled it to the ground. So, Putin hasn't done anything like that yet, but if he's facing defeat, isn't that something that would be on the escalatory ladder, is to basically start leveling Ukrainian cities